The Hittites, an ancient Anatolian people, emerged as a powerful empire in the late Bronze Age, around the 17th to the 12th centuries BC. Centered at their ancient capital, Hattusa, their empire at its peak covered parts of modern Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon. Known for their advanced skills in metallurgy and military innovation, they were among the first to use iron, and developed a chariot corps that significantly enhanced their warfare capabilities. They are also notable for their complex legal and administrative systems, and the extensive use of cuneiform script, which they adapted from the Mesopotamians to create an official archive of clay tablets. And diplomatically, they were engaged in both conflict and cooperation with neighboring states, including, of course, Egypt, with whom they signed one of the earliest known peace treaties in history, following the Battle of Kadesh around 1274 BC, a treaty that still hangs in the United Nations offices today. It was a treaty with Pharaoh Ramesses II of Egypt, which ended years of hostilities and began a period of mutual cooperation, which included marital alliances. Of course, the Hittite Empire had to go into the pages of history like everyone else, and thus their decline in the 12th century is attributed to internal strife, compounded by invasions, and was part of the larger pattern of collapse observed in several Bronze Age civilizations. But despite their fall, the Hittites left a lasting mark on the region's history, captivating historians to this very day. After all, that is why you're here, isn't it? Welcome to the channel, friend. If you are new here, it's good to finally welcome you. It's great that you found me, and for those returning, it's great to have you back. Off we go on another adventure. If you'd like to support the channel, you're already doing it by just enjoying the content. The like and subscribe is also 2 clicks away, and those who want to go above and beyond may refer to the video description. You'll find a few links that may be relevant to you. And why not say hello in the comments? Tell me where you're watching from. I'm recording this from Melbourne, Australia, and I'd like to know where you are. But without further ado, let's begin. The origins of the Hittites trace back between 4400 and 4100 BC, when the Anatolian language family diverged from the Proto-Indo-European language family. Subsequent genetic and archaeological findings suggest that Proto-Anatolian speakers may have migrated to Anatolia between as early as 5000 and 3000 BC, and thus we may conclude that the evolution of the Proto-Hittite language around 2100 BC led to the emergence of the Hittite language proper, which was prevalent in central Anatolia from the 20th to the 12th centuries BC. The earliest records tie the Hittites to the kingdom of Kusara before 1750. During the Bronze Age, the Hittites, along with the native Hattians and the Hurrians, either conquered or gradually assimilated into one another's cultures. Scholars have examined their links to the Balkan Ezero culture and the Caucasian Maykop culture as part of these migration patterns. Around 4200 to 4000 BC, steppe herders, speakers of early Indo-European dialects, seem to have moved into the lower Danube Valley, possibly triggering or exploiting the collapse of old Europe. And it's suggested that these languages precursors to those found in Anatolia, might have led their speakers to migrate to Anatolia around 3000 BC. Anatolians likely migrated to the Near East from the north, either via the Balkans or the Caucasus, during the 3rd millennium BC. This movement aligns with the modern views of Ascobarbola, connecting the arrival of Indo-European speakers in Anatolia with migrations from the Yamnaya culture into the Danube Valley around 2800 BC. It supports the widely held belief that the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European languages was introduced to Anatolia during the time of the 3rd millennium. Further research indicates that Hittite language incorporated many agricultural terms from neighboring Eastern cultures, which also suggests a migration route through the Caucasus. Now, the primary indigenous groups in central Anatolia during this period were the Hurrians and the Hattians, who spoke non-Indo-European languages. The affiliation of the Hattic language is a subject of debate, with some suggesting it might be related to the Northwest Caucasian languages, while the Hurrian language was part of the small Hurro-Urartian family. The region also hosted Assyrian colonies during the Old Assyrian Empire, 2025 to 1750 BC, from whom the Hittites adopted their cuneiform script, which we are fortunate enough to still be able to have and hold today. While following the collapse of the Old Assyrian Empire in the mid-18th century BC, the Hittites took their time to establish their presence in the region. Initially, Hittite groups were localized around various cities. Eventually, it was only natural that strong rulers came about, and they centralized their power in Hattusa, which is modern-day Bogaskale in Turkey, consolidating these groups and conquering large parts of central Anatolia to form what was recognizable at this point in the mid-18th century as the Hittite Kingdom. The Hittite state emerged during the Middle Bronze Age, which is around 1900 to 1650 BC in north-central Anatolia, particularly around the Kizzuwatna River. This region saw the amalgamation of several small polities into what would become a significant Bronze Age empire, a key player that stood up just like the others did, until it eventually fell down, just like the others did. Well, the formation and early history of the Hittite kingdom are documented through several ancient sources, including 4 cushion-shaped tablets, likely originating from Kusara, Nesha, or another Anatolian site rather than Hattusa itself. These tablets, possibly first inscribed in the 18th century BC, were written in the Old Hittite language, using the Old script. Later copies of these documents, mostly in Akkadian, date from the 14th and 13th centuries BC. These early texts outline a rivalry between 2 branches of the royal family, a northern branch initially based in Zalpoa, later moving to Hattusa, and a southern branch in Kusara and the former Assyrian colony of Ganesh. The northern branch retained Hattian names, indicative of the region's indigenous language isolate, while the southern branch adopted Indo-European Hittite and Luwian names. Significant early conflicts included Zalpoa's attack on Ganesh under King Una in 1833 BC, during a time when Ganesh served as a vibrant merchant colony of the old Assyrian Empire. Thankfully, we know all about these events from the tablets that have been left. Turns out when you write on clay, it tends to last a long, long time. Well, several local kings ruled Ganesh during this era, including Hurmili before 1790 BC, Pahanu briefly in 1790, Inar around 1790 to 75, and Warshama circa 1775 to 1750. Now onto a critical text that we have, which is known as the Anita text. It begins by describing Pitana, the king of Kusara, and his conquest of neighboring Nesha, also known as Ganesh, around 1750 BC. Anita, Pitana's son, continued these conquests by taking over several northern cities, including Hattusa, of which he famously cursed, likely as propaganda against the northern branch of the royal family. Anita's reign lasted from roughly 1745 to 1720 BC. Following Anita, Zuzu reigned from around 1720 to 1710, until Ganesh was ultimately destroyed between the years of 1710 and 1705, which will also devastated the Assyrian trading system there. A noble family from Kusara survived the destruction of Ganesh and continued to contest the Zalpawan or Hattusan rulers, although it is unclear if they were direct descendants of Anita. The Zalpa lineage persisted, with Huzziya I, a descendant from Zalpa, eventually taking complete control of Hatti. His son-in-law, Labarna I from Hurma, usurped the throne, but ensured his lineage by adopting Huzziya's grandson, Hattushili, as his son and heir, setting the stage for the emergence of the powerful Hittite kingdom centered in Hattusa. We are rather fortunate to have an ancient record from a work titled The Edict of Telepinu, dated to the 16th century BC, which vividly portrays the vigorous and expansive nature of Hattusili's reign. And the translation that we have goes like this. Hattusili was king, and his sons, brothers-in-laws, family members, and troops were all united. Wherever he went on campaign, he controlled the enemy land with force. He destroyed the lands, one after the other. He took away their power, and made them borders of the sea. When he came back from campaign, however, each of his sons went somewhere to a country, and in his hand the great cities prospered. But when the later prince's servants became corrupt, they began to devour their properties, conspired constantly against their masters, and began to shed their blood. Well, that's quite a review, don't you think? It's a passage that doesn't only underscore the unity and military success of Hattusili's regime, but it also shows the subsequent internal strife and corruption among his descendants. A tale as old as time, it seems. The apple falls far from the tree. Well, this period of prosperity was marred by the prince's servants' corruption, which led to this significant internal conflict, as pointed out in the Edict of Telepinu we just read. But the details of how these issues were resolved remain a little unclear. Unfortunately, more sources about the resolution to these conflicts are, at the moment, nowhere to be found. But that's the great thing about cuneiform. You never know where the next clay tablets are going to show up. I imagine there's so many more of them, just waiting underground somewhere, waiting to be discovered. One day. Well, as for Hattusili, at the end of his life, he named his grandson Mursili I as his successor, ensuring the continuation of his lineage and the dynastic rule of the Hittite Empire. Mursili, following in the footsteps of Hattusili, expanded the Hittite Empire significantly. Around 1595 BC, or around 1587, depending on whether you're following middle or low middle chronology, he launched a major campaign along the Euphrates River. This campaign was notable for its audacity, bypassing Assyria to sack Mari and even Babylon. That's right, that great old city. The raid resulted in the overthrow of the Amorite rulers of the old Babylonian Empire, marking a high point in Hittite military prowess. But rather than annexing Babylonia into his empire, Mursili handed control over to the Kassites, setting the stage for their 4-century-long rule. Mursili's return to Hatti was urgent, prompted by his concern over potential revolts at home, which reflected the precarious nature of his reign. The long military campaign had also drained Hatti's resources and destabilized the capital to a point of near anarchy. Upon his return, Mursili was not very well welcomed. In fact, they immediately killed him, assassinated, before he could even take a look to see who was doing the revolting. It was either during his journey back, or pretty much as soon as he walked into the city. In fact, as with betrayal in all these great stories is a running theme, his assassin was his own brother-in-law, Hantili I, who then took the opportunity to jump into his shoes and ascended the throne, which is more than a bit cheeky if you ask me. Once again, a prevailing theme. While Hantili himself survived multiple assassination attempts, as he was not too popular, but his family was less fortunate. His wife, Harapsili, and her son were murdered. It was a period that marked the beginning of a violent sequence of murders within the royal family, culminating in further assassinations involving other royal family members, including Siddhanta I and his son Amunna. Of course, one can imagine that all of this internal turmoil had weakened the Hittite state significantly. It's hard to do anything when you're constantly looking over your shoulder. And the Hurrians noticed. Their opportunity may have just come along. And thus, they capitalized on the Hittite instability to expand their territory, seizing Aleppo and the coastal region of Adenia, which they renamed Kizzuwatna, later known as Cilicia. Throughout the latter part of the 16th century BC, the Hittites were largely confined to their core territories due to the ongoing dynastic disputes and conflicts with the Hurrians. And thus, they then entered a phase characterized by weak kings and scant historical records, making it rather difficult to reconstruct the events of this period accurately. A very long way from the days of Hattusili and those great victories. Well, the political landscape was inherently unstable due to the nature of Hittite kingship, which, unlike the kingship of Egypt, which was divine, treated kings as merely primus inter pares, or as we know in English, first among equals. Succession was not strictly hereditary, leading to frequent power struggles, quite similar actually to the later Wars of the Roses in England. Many parallels. Well, this pattern of expansion under strong rulers, followed by contraction under weak ones, reported throughout the 500-year history of the Hittite kingdom. The political situation did begin to stabilize somewhat under King Telepinu around 1500 BC. Telepinu managed to secure some military victories by allying with one Hurrian state, Kizzuwatna, against the other Hurrian state, Mitanni. Well, he also took significant steps to stabilize the royal succession and mitigate the internal strife that had plagued his predecessors. Telepinu was the last ruler of the old Hittite kingdom, with his reign ending around 1500 BC. His tenure marked the transition to the Middle Kingdom, a period characterized by a significant decline in power and a paucity of historical records. The 15th century BC in particular remains largely mysterious due to scant surviving evidence. The decline during the Middle Kingdom was exacerbated by constant attacks from the Kaskians, a non-Indo-European group settled along the Black Sea shores. In response to these pressures, the Hittite capital was relocated twice. First to Sapinua, and subsequently to Samuha. Although an archive exists in Sapinua, its contents have not been fully translated or understood. Once again, just throwing more mystery to the era. This period eventually gave way to the Hittite Empire phase, beginning with the reign of Tudalia around 1430 BC. Come on, you didn't think they were going to stay down forever. Well, the early Hittite rulers, including those of preceding periods, are credited with pioneering the practice of forming treaties and alliances, positioning the Hittites as early innovators in international politics and diplomacy. During this time, the Hittite religious pantheon also expanded significantly, incorporating numerous deities and ritual practices from the Hurrian culture, reflecting a broader trend of cultural assimilation and adaptation. With the reign of Tudalia I, who may not have been the first to bear that name, the Hittite kingdom emerged from obscurity and entered what is now known as the Hittite Empire period. This was an era marked by significant transformations, notably the strengthening of the monarchy. During this time, the Hittites primarily settled in the older regions of southern Anatolia, rather than expanding into Aegean lands. It was a period that also saw the consolidation of power as kingship finally became hereditary, and the king was revered with a kind of superhuman aura, and often addressed as "my son" by the Hittite citizens, and that's S-U-N, not S-O-N, by the way. The monarchs of this era not only ruled as sovereigns, but also acted as high priests, annually touring the Hittite holy cities to lead festivals and oversee the maintenance of sanctuaries. These tours once again showed the religious role of the king, intertwining governance and religious duties which helped fortify the king's status within the empire. So, back to Tudalia. During his tenure around 1400 BC, he reinvigorated old alliances, particularly with Kizzuwatna. He successfully conquered the Hurrian states of Aleppo and Mitanni, and made significant gains to the west, at the expense of Arzawa, a Luwian state. After the reign of Tudalia, the Hittite kingdom entered another period of weakness, during which its enemies advanced all the way to the capital Hattusa, and rather unfortunately destroyed it. Yet, under the leadership of Suppiluliuma around 1350 BC, the kingdom not only recovered, but expanded, and significantly. Suppiluliuma reconquered Aleppo and imposed vassalage on Mitanni, which had already been weakened by the Assyrians. He also achieved victories over Carchemish, an Amorite city-state. Suppiluliuma cleverly installed his sons as rulers over this new territory, solidifying his control. During his reign, Babylonia was also under the allied Kassites, positioning Suppiluliuma as a dominant power alongside Assyria and Egypt. This influence was so significant that Egypt, seeking an alliance, proposed a marriage between one of Suppiluliuma's sons and the widow of Tutankhamun. But tragically, the son was murdered en route to Egypt, and the alliance was never realized. Well, around the same time, the Middle Assyrian Empire began to rise in power, with the ascension of Ashur-uballit I in 1365. He quickly attacked and defeated Matiwazir of Mitanni, despite Suppiluliuma's attempts to support the Mitanni king to counterbalance Assyria's growing influence. The Assyrians expanded their territory, seizing lands from the Mitanni and the Hurrians, and eventually encroaching on Hittite territories in eastern Asia Minor. Adad-nirari I, succeeding Ashur-uballit, further annexed territories including Carchemish and northeast Syria from the Hittites. During the reign of Suppiluliuma, the Hittite Empire was also struck by a devastating epidemic, reportedly of tularemia, which afflicted the kingdom for decades, and even claimed the lives of Suppiluliuma himself and his successor, Arnuwanda II. This disease significantly weakened the Hittites, affecting their military and political stability. Well, following Suppiluliuma, that eldest son, Arnuwanda, had a brief reign until his death, after which another son, Mursili II, took the throne around 1330 BC. Inheriting a strong eastern front, Mursili II could focus on the western threats. So, he addressed the challenges from Arzawa by deploying an early instance of biological warfare, sending infected rams to their lands. Mursili II also dealt with threats from Milawanda, also known as Miletus, which was influenced by Ahiawa, a term that recent scholarship has linked closely to Mycenaean Greece, or at least a significant part of it, suggesting an active Mycenaean involvement or even interference in that region of Anatolia. The prosperity of the Hittite Empire was heavily reliant on its control of critical trade routes and access to metal resources. A key strategic region was northern Syria, which connected the Cilician gates with Mesopotamia. This area's defense became crucial as the Hittites faced Egyptian expansion under Pharaoh Ramesses II. One of the most significant confrontations between the Hittites and Egyptians was the Battle of Kadesh, which occurred around 1274 BC, during the 5th year of the reign of Ramesses II. Now, the battle's outcome remains unclear, but it appears to have been indecisive. While the Hittites initially had the upper hand, the arrival of Egyptian reinforcements prevented a total Hittite victory. The Egyptians managed to force the Hittites back into the fortress of Kadesh. However, despite this tactical advantage, the Egyptians could not fully capitalize on their position due to their own substantial losses, which made it impossible for them to lay a prolonged siege of the fortress. Thus the battle ended without a definitive victor, serving more as a testament to the resilience and military capabilities of both empires, rather than a conclusive engagement. If you want to learn more about it in detail, I have a video on Ramesses II, and also a video on the Battle of Kadesh. Feel free to go and have a look at them. Well after the Battle of Kadesh around 1274 BC, the geopolitical landscape saw both the Hittites and Egyptians decline in power, completely overshadowed by the rising might of Assyria. The Assyrian king Shalmaneser I capitalized on this regional instability, conquering the Hurrian and Mitanni kingdoms, which had previously been under some Hittite protection, and expanded Assyrian territory up to the head of the Euphrates. Of course, this expansion threatened the crucial Hittite trade routes, previously endangered by Egyptian influence. During this turbulent period, Mu'attali's son, Urhi-Teshub, ascended the Hittite throne as Mursili III and reigned for 7 years. His reign ended following a civil conflict with his uncle Hattusili III, who succeeded him. Recognizing the growing threat from Assyria, Hattusili III sought to stabilize the region through diplomacy. He formed an alliance with Ramesses II of Egypt, who was also concerned about Assyrian ambitions. Old rivalries put to rest to face the greater foe, it seems. This alliance culminated in the Treaty of Kadesh around 1258 BC, which is notable for being one of the oldest surviving treaties. It established defined borders in southern Canaan and included the marriage of a Hittite princess to Ramesses, cementing their diplomatic ties. Hattusili III's successor, Tudalia IV, managed to maintain some resistance against Assyrian advances into Hittite territories, though he ultimately lost significant lands and suffered a major defeat by Tukulti-Ninurta I of Assyria in the Battle of Nirya. Tudalia IV also briefly extended Hittite influence to Cyprus, before it, too, fell to the Assyrian forces. Better luck next time. Now, onto the reign of Suppiluliuma II, the last Hittite king, which saw fleeting military successes, a little spark in the dark in those final days, including a naval victory, actually, which was fought off the coast of Cyprus. However, the Assyrians under Ashur-resh-ishi I continued to encroach on Hittite territories, eventually annexing large portions of their land and overpowering other regional players, like the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar I. Concurrently, the migration of the Sea Peoples exerted additional pressure on the Hittite Empire. This group moved through the Mediterranean, disrupting trade routes and conquering key regions like Cilicia and Cyprus, previously under Hittite control, and established the state of Philistia in Canaan. By around 1180 BC, multiple threats culminated in the destruction of Hattusa. The Hittite capital was burned down by a coalition of invading forces, including the Kaskians, Phrygians, and Bregers. It was an event that marked the end of the Hittite kingdom, contributing to this broader pattern of chaos seen across the eastern Mediterranean during the Late Bronze Age. Environmental factors, such as a prolonged drought, indicated by tree ring studies around this period, also played a role in the destabilization and eventual decline of the Hittite state. And so, by 1160 BC, significant shifts had transformed the political landscape of Asia Minor. During this period, Tiglath-Pileser I, the king of Assyria, was actively combating Mushki, identified with the Phrygians, who were advancing into southern Anatolia from the Anatolian highlands. Additionally, the Kaska people, long-standing adversaries of the Hittites from the northern regions between Hatti and the Black Sea, aligned with the Mushki. The Phrygians, having migrated from the Balkans, where they were known as the Bregers tribe, displaced the Macedonians and had overrun Cappadocia to the west. Following the collapse of the Hittite kingdom, a series of Syro-Hittite states emerged in Anatolia and northern Syria, which effectively continued the legacy of Hittite civilization. Notably, Carchemish and Melid were prominent among these states, with Carchemish's royal family believed to be a cadet branch of the Central Hittite royal line. These Syro-Hittite states were progressively subdued by the expanding Neo-Assyrian Empire, eventually becoming vassal states under Shalmaneser III, who lived from 858 to 823 BC, and were fully integrated eventually into the empire during the reign of Sargon II, 722 to 705 BC. At the same time, a potent entity known as Tabal dominated much of southern Anatolia, referred to by the Greeks as Tibarenoi and by the Romans as Tibareni, and mentioned by Josephus and Thobeles. The people of Tabal possibly spoke Luwian, as suggested by inscriptions in Anatolian hieroglyphs found in the region. This state, like its neighbors, was eventually annexed also by the Neo-Assyrian Empire. This period also marked significant linguistic changes, with the advent of the alphabet overshadowing older writing systems like Luwian hieroglyphs and cuneiform. The alphabet was introduced into Anatolia through two conduits, from the Aegean region by the Bregers, who would also become known as the Phrygians, and the Phoenicians and adjacent groups in Syria. Ever wondered why we call it phonics and the phonetic alphabet? Well, there's your answer. No, we can't leave it there. Such a negative note. I think it's negative, at least, seeing the Hittites crushed into the dustpan of history. Let's talk about a few interesting aspects about their religious practices, because I think that's particularly fun to talk about. I always like the old religions and those old gods, with all their little eccentricities. They're exciting. I think they're pretty cool. Well, the religious beliefs of the Hittites and Luwians, while deeply rooted in ancient Mesopotamian traditions, also show strong ties to reconstructed Proto-Indo-European mythology. This is evident in the figure of Tarhunt, the Hittite god of thunder, whose myth involving the serpent Iluyanka mirrors similar tales from the other Indo-European mythologies. For instance, Tarhunt's struggle with Iluyanka is reminiscent of the Vedic god Indra's battle with the serpent Vritra, as well as Thor's encounters with Jormungandr in Norse mythology. Additionally, this motif parallels the daily battle between Re and Apophis in Egyptian mythology, highlighting a common theme of cosmic struggle across various ancient cultures. Copying the homework, but just changing it up a little bit, I think. Now, Hittite mythology also heavily incorporates elements from their neighbors, the Hurrians. The closeness of their mythologies has led them to being jointly categorized under Hittite Hurrian mythology in scholarly works, such as those published by the Oxford University Press. However, the primary sources on Hittite mythology are mostly artistic in nature, with textual records being scarce and mostly confined to the later periods of the Old Hittite Kingdom. These texts often take the form of cult inventories that provide insights into the integration of mythological figures and narratives into daily religious practices. The pantheon itself is a syncretism of Hattian, Hurrian, and Hittite elements, with additional influences from Mesopotamian and Canaanite through Hurrian intermediaries. The Hittites, you see, lacked a clearly defined creation myth in their recorded texts, leading scholars to speculate about the roles and relationships within their pantheon. It is believed that the Hattian mother goddess, potentially linked to the Neolithic great goddess of Katlahoyok, might have been considered a consort to the Anatolian storm god, thereby connecting Hittite religious narratives to those of other Indo-European traditions, such as those involving Thor, Indra, and Zeus. A synthesis of mythologies, a complex cultural interaction in ancient Anatolia. It shows the Hittites' role as both recipients and transmitters of religious ideas. And thus their religious practices were characterized by their responsive nature, rather than adherence to a regular ceremonial schedule. They conducted rituals primarily during challenging times, or significant events, closely intertwining myth with ritual by reenacting mythological stories during these ceremonies. These practices were largely focused on pit rituals, believed to foster a connection with the chthonic deities, gods of the underworld. These necromantic rituals aim to summon these gods from the world of the dead to the world of the living, show the Hittites' deep engagement with the divine forces governing death and the earth. Arena, located a day's march from the Hittite capital of Hattusa, was a major cult center, particularly for the worship of the sun goddess Arena, a key deity in the Hittite pantheon. Despite the central role of such major cult centers, local traditions, of course, varied significantly, as evidenced by records from cult inventories. The fluidity of these local practices was due to the absence of standardized national ritual practice, allowing for flexibility in smaller, local festivals and worship activities. Of course, if you've watched my videos about the ancient Greek religious practices, it's generally the same thing. It's not always a standardized form of ritual. Each little village and little city-state has its own opinions on how the gods should be worshipped, and that makes it interesting. Now, the Hittite king, who also served as a high priest, played his own role in maintaining the religious order, making it his duty to visit every cult site and temple within his domain. And upon his death, the king was deified, reflecting his dual role as both a temporal leader and spiritual intermediary. A reciprocal relationship between the gods and the king, which was mirrored in the broader societal expectation that the gods would provide for the people if they were properly worshipped. King Mursili II's plea during a time of agricultural hardships illustrates the practical implications of this belief system. He lamented the devastation of the land and the consequent inability to perform rituals, highlighting a crisis where the gods were seen as holding humans accountable for lapses in worship due to circumstances completely beyond their control. In fact, we have an account from an old tablet of the time that talks about this, and it goes like this. All of the land of Hatti is dying, so that no one prepares for the sacrificial loaf and libation for you gods. The ploughman who used to work the fields of the gods has died, so that no one works or reaps the fields of gods any longer. The miller woman who used to prepare sacrificial loaves of the gods has died, so that they no longer make the sacrificial loaves. As for the corral and the sheepfold from which one used to cull the offerings of sheep and cattle, the cowherds and shepherds have died, and the corral and sheepfold are empty. So it happens that the sacrificial loaves, libations, and animal sacrifices are cut off. And you come to us, O gods, and hold us culpable in this matter. It's within this invocation that we find that it not only underscores the dependency of divine favor on successful harvests, but it also shows the informal yet crucial communication between the Hittites and their gods. You didn't have to do it the same as everybody else, but by God, you better be doing something. The Hittites often interacted with their deities directly through personal appeals that could bypass elaborate rituals or priestly mediation, especially in casual or urgent contexts. Think about how people cross their fingers while they're scratching that lottery ticket. Things like this. This pragmatic and direct approach to divinity also involved using the divine will to justify human actions, much like the ancient Egyptians, integrating religious justification into the fabric of societal and political life. And what about the Hittite pantheon? Well, it was known for its 1,000 gods, and it reflects a complex and frankly fragmented divine landscape, with numerous deities recorded in inscriptions who are today now known only by their names and not their functions. An extensive array of gods, which is partly due to the Hittites' resistance to syncretism, the blending of gods and religious practices into a unified structure. Each Hittite town often revered its own distinct storm god, and local deities were not commonly merged into singular national deities. This practice points to a significant degree of local autonomy and cultural diversity, suggesting a social and political structure that was decentralized and varied across different regions. By the 13th century BC, however, there seem to have been concerted efforts to harmonize this sprawling religious landscape. The queen and priestess Puduhepa played a key role in these efforts, seeking to organize and rationalize the Hittite religious practices. In one of her inscriptions, she illustrates the process of syncretism by aligning the sun goddess of Arena with Hebat, a deity associated with another region, indicating a shift towards creating a more unified religious identity. Hittite mythology often features a broad ensemble of gods and goddesses, with narratives that typically revolve around complex issues affecting the entire cosmos or community. These myths usually involve a collective effort to resolve crises. Unlike simple moral tales, these stories are dynamic and they're action-packed, drawing in multiple characters, each with a vested interest in the outcome. In Hittite mythology, the storm god of Nerik, worshipped in the Bronze Age cold center north of the Hittite capitals Hattusa and Suppinuwa, is considered sacred and a son of Wurusemmu, the sun goddess of Arena. This deity, connected to Mount Zalianu near Nerik, played a crucial role in controlling the weather and ensuring rainfall for the region's agriculture. And of course, that's pretty damn important. Well, during times when the Kaskar people seized control of Nerik, rituals to appease the storm god were conducted from Hattusa, involving offerings such as thick breads, libations, sheep and oxen. Kumarbi, another significant figure in Hittite mythology, mirrors the role of Kronos in Greek mythology. Known as the father of Tarhunt, the god of thunder, Kumarbi's narrative includes fathering Ulikumi, a stone monster reminiscent of the Typhon from Hesiod's works. This mythological context shows a complex family of deities, with Tarhunt linked closely to his son Telepinu, the god of agriculture and fertility, and his daughter Inara, a protective deity associated with the Puruli Spring Festival. A major temple at Hattusa likely served as a central worship site for this divine family. Now, the Telepinu myth explores the theme of dereliction when Telepinu's disappearance leads to a catastrophic cessation of all fertility, causing widespread despair across the land. The resolution involves a bee sent by the goddess Hanahana, finding and awakening Telepinu with a sting, though this initially enrages him further. Eventually, the goddess Kamrusepa calms him with a magic restoring balance and fertility. Similarly, the slaying of the dragon myth, recited during New Year rituals aimed at ensuring agricultural prosperity, depicts a battle between the storm god and a malevolent serpent. Inara, a goddess, devises plans involving a human, Hupashia, to overcome the serpent. The story emphasizes the cooperative yet complex relationship between gods and humans, where divine conflicts often require mortal assistance for resolution, and goddesses play crucial roles in strategizing and restoring order, a dynamic that reflects a broader theme in Hittite mythology, where the divine order relies on both inter-god cooperation and human involvement to maintain balance and address crises. And with that, for the moment, we come to the end of our history of the Hittites. If you want me to do a video on Hittite mythology, I suppose I could look into it. You'll have to leave a word in the comments and tell me if that's something you'd like to see. Now let me thank my top tier patrons: Britt, Charles, Stark Factory, JC, Jeffrey, Wendy, Tim, James, Aaron, Scott, Dark, Ben, and Melissa. Thank you very much, and thank you for listening so far. I'll see you in the next video, everyone. Good night for now. Go and have a good rest.